Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome. And as the MSP for Aberdeen South and North Kincardine and Minister for Public Health, I'd like to welcome the Cabinet to Aberdeen. Cabinet is delighted to be here in Aberdeen for the second in a series of Cabinet meetings for 2015 to be held out with Edinburgh. The Cabinet's always been committed to holding meetings throughout the length and breadth of the country. However, last year we saw an engagement in politics on a scale that's unprecedented in recent history, and we want to build on this by holding even more of these public meetings. We want to build on this renewed sense of energy and enthusiasm to hear the people, to allow as many as possible the opportunity to pose questions and to answer any queries you have about the work of the Scottish Government. In a moment, you will have the opportunity to hear from the First Minister. We'll then open the floor to take your questions for about an hour. And following the formal session, we hope you will be able to join us for a cup of tea and a biscuit, where you will be able to continue the discussions with individual Cabinet Ministers. So without further ado, will you please welcome the First Minister of Scotland, the Right Honourable Nicola Sturgeon, MSP.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Maureen, for that introduction, and an enormous thank you to all of you for being here. This is the second time in just a few months that I've had the privilege of speaking in this wonderful hall, and it's great to see it full with people interested and eager to discuss the issues of the day with us. I know I speak on behalf of all of my Cabinet colleagues here this evening when I say that we are all absolutely delighted to be in Aberdeen today. Between all of us today, we've undertaken, I think, 22 visits and meetings with local companies and local organisations. I'll mention some of the visits that I've been on later on, but I think it's fair to say that throughout all of these meetings today, we've had the opportunity to hear the issues on the minds of people across Aberdeen, and that's been very, very helpful and useful, and I've no doubt we'll hear the same this evening. Increasing the frequency of these Cabinet meetings and Cabinet visits up and down the country is very, very important. The SNP government has gone, as we describe it, on tour every summer since we took office, and that's been a hugely worthwhile exercise. But I have decided we're going to up the frequency of these occasions when we get out of Edinburgh and come to different parts of the country. It's one of the ways in which we will meet the pledge that I made when I first became First Minister, and that pledge is quite simple. I want to lead the most open and accessible Scottish Government that the country has ever had. So the main purpose of tonight's event is not for you to listen to me, although you are going to have to do that for a wee while longer, but that's not the main purpose of this evening's event. The main purpose is for us to listen to you. The main part of the evening, most of the time this evening, has been set aside for you to ask us questions. And I want to stress something very important at the very, very outset. You can ask us anything you want to ask us this evening. You know, people who don't live in Scotland often hear what we do as a Cabinet and can't quite believe that we come and we sit as a whole Cabinet in front of big audiences of people like this and allow you to ask absolutely anything you want. Your questions have not been submitted in advance, or they haven't had to be submitted in advance. You don't have your questions vetted. We don't, although maybe sometimes we wish we could, pick the easy ones and reject all the difficult ones. I get to pick the easy ones and give them all the difficult ones. It's one of the privileges of being First Minister. But the serious point is this: it's your opportunity to ask us anything that you want. Whatever's on your mind, whatever is important to you, this is your chance to get an answer out of me or one of my ministerial team. There may be things that you ask us tonight that we don't have the answer to absolutely at the tip of our fingers. And if that's the case, we will undertake to get back to you with a detailed answer as soon as possible. It may also be the case that some of you have questions that you want to ask of a more personal nature, or maybe, although looking out, I don't believe this is true of any of you, maybe you're too shy to ask your question in front of everybody else. If that's the case, there are forms that you, I think, will be given. You can note your question down, give it to us before the end of the evening, and we'll send you a written reply. This is a genuine attempt for you to get the information that you want from us, or for you to give us suggestions and ideas, or even instructions as to the things you want us to do, because you are, after all, the boss, and we serve you. So that's why tonight is so important. Now, I know you'll ask a range of questions across a range of topics, so I'm not going to go into too many topics in my introductory remarks, but I do want to say just a few words touching on some issues that are of importance to Aberdeen and to Aberdeen's economy, some issues that are of topical interest. And although I'll maybe come on to one or two wider topics, I don't think it will surprise anybody here this evening to know that what I want to spend a fair bit of time talking to you about this evening is oil and gas, and the importance of the oil and gas industry, not just to the Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire economy, but to the economy of the whole of our country. Earlier this afternoon, one of the activities I've undertaken in Aberdeen today was to chair a meeting of the Scottish Energy Advisory Board. And that's the body that the Scottish Government set up in 2009 to bring industry, the public sector, academics, trade unions together to make sure we are doing everything that we can to make the most of our incredible, outstanding, astonishing oil, gas and renewable energy potential. And the main focus of today's meeting was on how we can support and promote the oil and gas sector. All of us know that the industry is going through a challenging time right now, which is why the Scottish Government has already taken action. Our immediate priority is to protect jobs, is to maintain jobs and skills in the sector, while also helping people who might have been made redundant or who might face redundancy to return to work. So last month we set up an Energy Jobs Task Force to work with companies to retain skills and employment in the sector, to match those who are facing redundancy with opportunities elsewhere. We've also given a guarantee, a very important guarantee, that any modern apprentice that is faced with redundancy during this period will be offered alternative employment or continued off-the-job training. And our key aim here, which will be obvious to all of you, is to ensure that we retain and improve the training, the expertise and the skills which make our workforce in this sector admired right around the globe. We want to avoid losing jobs, which the industry will require again once conditions improve. And that's why the work of the Jobs Task Force is such an important priority for us. And it's worth remembering that although there are differences this time, not least to do with the maturity of the North Sea Basin, the oil and gas sector here has faced tough times before. You know, back in 1999, the price of oil fell to $10 a barrel. And just after that, there were predictions then that the industry would only employ 30,000 people in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire by the end of the next decade. Now, as all of you know, the opposite happened to that. Instead of employment falling, it grew rapidly. And by 2010, it had reached not 30,000, but 130,000. Now, I'm not saying the recovery this time will resemble exactly what happened then, but in many respects at least, we're actually better placed now than we were in 1999. And that's because the expertise Scottish companies have gained over the past 40 years is now being exported right across the world. We're truly a global success story. In fact, you can go to any oil rig anywhere in the world, I'm reliably informed that this is true, any oil rig anywhere in the world, and you will hear an Aberdonian accent. So that is something, I think, to be very proud of. I, with John Swinney, the Deputy First Minister, visited a company, a fascinating company earlier today called Pipelines to Data. That company has developed technology which helps it to clean and maintain oil pipelines much more effectively. It's employing 35 people just now, but it's aiming by the end of 2017 to have a workforce of 100. It's already won an important contract with Statoil in Norway. It's now targeting markets in the Middle East, Asia, and the United States. It's just one of hundreds of supply chain companies that are creating jobs and wealth in Scotland by selling their goods and services overseas. And crucially, because of the work that company does, it's ideally placed to help some of the bigger companies do what they need to do to get through these challenging times, cut their costs of production, become more efficient. And altogether, Scotland's oil and gas supply chain exports were worth £10 billion in 2012, and the value of them has more than trebled since 2002. Now, most of that success is down to the expertise and the enterprise and the commitment of individual companies, but the Scottish Government also provides significant support where we can. We promote trade and overseas sales. Scottish Development International has opened new offices in Norway, Ghana, Brazil, and Canada in recent years to take advantage of opportunities, the big opportunities that there are in the energy sector. And we've established Energy Skills Scotland to ensure that people, particularly our young people, have the training that they need to build successful careers in the sector. And we're continually making ourselves available and accessible to industry representatives. Fergus Ewing has confirmed just this week that he'll be travelling to Houston to meet some of our key inward investors. And that's the latest, I'm told, in more than 100 visits and meetings that he personally has attended with the sector in the past 3 years. So that's the work the Scottish Government does, and we will continue to do, to protect and build and support a critically important industry for Scotland. But, you know, if we're to make the most of our oil and gas reserves, we also need action from the UK Government on the areas that it still controls. And principally, that means action on tax. You know, successive UK governments, although since North Sea oil and gas was discovered, they've raked in somewhere in the region of £300 billion in revenues. Notwithstanding that, successive UK governments have often appeared to do more to hinder the oil and gas industry than to help it during the last couple of decades. You know, when the current Chancellor increased the supplementary charge tax in 2011, Oil and Gas UK estimated that it was one of 16 different tax changes in the previous decade, and many of these had been made without any prior consultation with the industry whatsoever. So we need different kind of action now from the UK Government. We need them to do something that perhaps they haven't always done before, make the kinds of tax changes that the industry is calling on them to make, the kind of changes that will support the industry's long-term needs. Firstly, we think they should reverse the 2011 increase in the supplementary charge, which did so much damage back when it was applied to North Sea oil and gas. Secondly, they should introduce an investment allowance to support investment in the sector. And finally, and perhaps most importantly in terms of the long term, we need the UK Government to take action to support exploration. You know, that's crucial to maximising the recovery of oil and gas, but the number of exploration wells being drilled is in decline. And there's really good evidence, very compelling evidence from Norway, when they introduced an exploration tax credit, that the number of discoveries there increased as a result of that, because it was designed to enable smaller and less established companies to claim relief for their exploration activities. So we need to see a similar policy adopted here in Scotland, and we're calling for that to be introduced by the Chancellor in the budget. The key point in all of this is this one. You know, the oil and gas sector has been important to Scotland, and it will be important to Scotland for a long time to come. But it has been important to successive Westminster governments. The revenue figure that I quoted earlier on speaks for itself. But over the past 5 decades, this city has been established as the energy capital of Europe. It's a centre for innovation, expertise, skills, and is recognised right across the world. And I have no doubt at all, that with the right support, we will ensure that it remains the energy capital of Europe for generations to come. So the Scottish Government will work in partnership with the UK Government, local authorities, the industry and others to ensure that that happens. We will do our bit, but we must see the UK Government do their bit as well and repay this city and this part of Scotland for all of the contribution that it has made to Treasury coffers over the years. Now, of course, one of the ways in which we support not just the oil and gas industry, but all businesses, is to make sure that we are supporting the infrastructure and the public services that we all depend on. So earlier today, Keith Brown and I, and you'll all be delighted to hear this, I am absolutely sure, cut the first sod for the new Aberdeen bypass. It's the largest... I thought that might be popular. It has been a long time coming, and believe me, that has been frustrating for us, but I know how frustrating it has been for you. But this now is the largest road scheme of its kind anywhere in the UK, and the route is on course to open in the winter of 2017. Now, the construction of the bypass on its own is going to be fantastic for the economy of this part of the country. It will support around 1,500 jobs and over 100 apprenticeships, graduate places and other training opportunities. And the long-term benefits are even greater still. Journey times across the city in peak hours are likely to be halved. The route is expected to bring in £6 billion of investment and support 14,000 additional jobs over the next 30 years. The investment in the bypass is, of course, just one of the ways in which we're supporting businesses and public services in the area. We've invested in improved train services to Dundee and Inverurie, improving frequency and creating more capacity, and we're now looking to reduce journey times as well. The small business bonus, so important to our small businesses, benefits more than 2,000 business premises here in the city of Aberdeen and a further 5,000 across the Shire. We spent more than £400 million on new hospitals and healthcare centres during the 7 years that we've been in office. And tomorrow morning, before I head back down to Edinburgh, I'll be delighted to open the new radiotherapy department at Aberdeen Royal Infirmary. We're also supporting affordable housing, which is so important to supporting the economy of Aberdeen. Alec Neil today visited the Craiginches site, where 120 homes are being developed for key public sector workers, including NHS staff. And we're keen to explore further opportunities. I attended the Oil and Gas Summit that was held in the city just 2 weeks ago today, I think, and made very clear on that occasion that we are very keen to work with Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire councils on any proposals for an Aberdeen City deal that they choose to put forward. And of course, this work in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire is matched across the country. We as a government are focused in everything we do on ensuring that all parts of this country can flourish and reach their potential. We work with local government, the third sector, the private sector, and others to enable companies to become more competitive and more productive, to support the public services that we all of us without exception, depend on. Because by doing that, we will help individuals to fulfil their potential, and we'll create a country that is fairer and a country that is more prosperous. Which leads me to the final point I want to make tonight before we get into the fun part of the evening, which is you grilling us on the issues that you've come here to talk about. But the final point I want to make tonight is an important one, and it's an issue very relevant to the decision the country will take in just a few weeks' time at the UK general election. And that is the issue of what is the right approach for the future to growing our economy, to protecting our public services, and to balancing the public books. The Westminster parties, we know, are all committed to a further and much deeper round of austerity. £30 billion more of austerity cuts across the UK planned for the next 2 years alone. Now, in my view, the human cost of austerity is already too high. The cuts that we've lived through over the past few years are hitting the most vulnerable in our society hardest. They're impacting more on women with families. They are making life more difficult for our public services. And by taking demand out of our economy, they're actually holding back economic growth. So I think it's time for a different approach, because as well as all of those issues, the austerity approach of Westminster is failing on its own terms. You know, we're told it's all about reducing the deficit. George Osborne in 2010 estimated that by next year he would be running a £6 billion surplus on his current spending. He won't be doing that. He'll be running a £49 billion deficit. So austerity hasn't helped to reduce the deficit because it's held back economic growth. So I think we need a different approach. And last week I set out some of the detail of that different approach I think we should take. You know, if we commit over the next 4 years, not to more public spending cuts, but to moderate increases in public spending, not a king's ransom, but 0.5% increase in public spending in real terms over the next 4 years, then what happens? Well, firstly, we still see the debt and the deficit reduce as a share of our economy, but we free up resources to invest in protecting the vulnerable, in protecting and enhancing and strengthening our public services, and we free up resources to invest in infrastructure, in innovation and skills, the things that will get our economy growing faster and help us to shrink the debt and the deficit even faster. So that's the different approach I think we should take. And there's a very clear choice, I think, beginning to open up for the country. Is it more failed austerity, or is it an approach that says let us grow our way out of debt and deficit while protecting the social fabric of our country? And I think the latter makes much more sense than the former. And my view on that has been informed greatly by listening to communities across the country. And I think we should do much more listening to what people in communities say about how we should take this country forward. One of the many fantastic things about the referendum campaign, apart from the result, that in my view wasn't fantastic, but we'll leave that to one side. One of the things that was fantastic was the way in which it encouraged all of us to consider and debate the kind of country we want Scotland to be. That's one of the reasons I think that many of us find the debate around Westminster politics now so narrow and depressing. We asked really fundamental questions about the kind of country we wanted Scotland to be, and I think we should continue to ask and to answer those fundamental questions. So let's harness the energy we saw in the referendum campaign on both sides of the debate, not just on one side, and use it, harness it, direct it to tackle the big issues that affect people in this city and right across our country. This evening, I've tried to set out some of the steps the government is taking to support jobs and investment to protect our public services. But what we want to do is to hear from you, to get the views of organisations, businesses and individuals about what more we need to do. That's what being an accessible and listening government is all about. So that's the purpose of this evening's event. It's why I'm delighted to see so many of you here this evening. Thank you very much for listening, and I now look forward to allowing my Cabinet colleagues to answer all your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, First Minister, for that informative and I think you would agree inspirational speech as to what the Scottish Government is doing to help every day the lives of people in Scotland and to move Scotland forward. So we now move to the question and answer session, and as the First Minister has said, we have Cabinet Ministers here to help, so I will now introduce them to you. So from your right, on the back row, we have Fergus Ewing, the Minister for Business, Energy and Tourism, Rosanna Cunningham, Cabinet Secretary for Fair Work, Skills and Training, Richard Lochhead, Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, Food and Environment, Fiona Hislop, Cabinet Secretary for Culture, Europe and External Affairs, Angela Constant, the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Lifelong Learning, Michael Matheson, the Cabinet Secretary for Justice, and in the front row next to me here we have Keith Brown, the Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure, Investment and Cities, my boss, Shona Robeson, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Wellbeing and Sport, and the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, who is the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Constitution and the Economy, and last but not least, Cabinet Secretary Alec Neil for Social Justice, Communities and Pensioner Rights. So we'll take questions in batches of 3, and then I'll invite the First Minister to respond to them. We have roving mics around the room, and I think we'll try and do it in batches rather than have the roving mics going all over the place. So perhaps if there are any questions from right at the far side. We've also received a few questions on Twitter from members of the public who were unable to make the event, and I'll try and remember to include some of them too. We normally have more questions than we have time, but don't worry, because there are on your chairs forms on which you can write down your questions, place them in the boxes at the back of the hall, and every question will receive a written reply. So let's make a start with the hands up on this side. Over at the back there. Yes, sir.
Hi, it's a pretty topical question just now. It's HSBC Bank. What possibilities is there getting a civil action against the bankers that are avoiding tax for their rich clients? Because if it was me, a man in the street, I would be getting hounded to death by the HMRC, and they should be jailed, basically. They're committing fraud. Simple as.
Okay, any more in that section of the audience? Yes, a bit further forward, Junie.
I used to be editor.
Would you like to give us your name, sir? Sorry.
Oh, my name is Michael Cormack, and I used to be editor of a business magazine in Beijing. And during that time, I became really aware of how innovative and the vitality of the startup scene over there. And I was wondering what efforts the Scottish Government's making to encourage entrepreneurs and to bring together the startups with venture capital and angel investors.
Okay, and the lady just a bit further forward, please.
Hello, Scottish Government. Could you tell me what plans the Scottish Government has for improving access to housing for people with disabilities, in particular family homes that are fully wheelchair accessible? There appears to be an acute shortage of such properties in Aberdeen, and the high house prices here compound the difficulties such families face finding accessible housing. Thank you.
Right, in a second I'm going to ask Alec Neil to answer the question about housing for people with disabilities, which is a very important question. I'll ask John to answer Michael's question about startups. We were having a discussion this morning at the company I spoke about this very issue, very, very important one. And first question about HSBC, I'll say a word about that myself, but then John maybe will say a word or two more about the anti-tax avoidance measures we're putting in place as a Scottish Government for the taxes we have responsibility for. But can I just say, firstly, on HSBC and tax avoidance in general, I think people should be held to account, frankly. And I think, the starting point for this is to say what Westminster politicians and, tax authorities and regulators for far too long haven't said, which is that this is downright immoral, wrong and completely indefensible. People who don't pay the tax they are due are depriving the rest of us of the public services and the kind of society that the rest of us contribute to and that we all rely on. Some of the discussion around this in the last few days has been infuriating. The people, saying, well, tax avoidance is legal, tax evasion's illegal, and equating what we've seen here with HSBC, like with people who use duty-free shops in airports and who save in ISAs. Let's get over that nonsense. The difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance is this: tax evasion is breaking the letter of the law. Tax avoidance is breaking the spirit of the law. Both of it is breaking the law, frankly, and it should be cracked down on. My constituency surgeries just now, and the same will be true of every politician here, are full of people who get their benefits sanctioned for missing appointments, for example, with the job centre. I had a guy at my surgery at the weekend who got the time for a job centre appointment wrong by a couple of hours and got his benefit sanctioned for a week or 2 weeks. Now, there's no quarter given for people in those positions, and yet we seem to think it's okay for people to avoid tax. It's not okay, and the sooner we change our entire attitude as a country towards it, the better. But John, do you want to pick up on more of the specifics about what we're doing and then take startups as well?
I will do. We're just, as a government, in April, we'll have responsibility for the collection of 2 new national taxes for the first time that have been devolved to Scotland, on land and buildings transaction tax and landfill tax. And because of that, we've had to set up an entirely new tax collection arrangement in Scotland. And when we took that legislation through Parliament, we decided that we would set the highest bar possible to tackling tax avoidance. So the First Minister made the point a second ago that tax evasion is illegal, and that's absolutely consistent with our position. But there's an awful lot of grey area left in UK tax legislation. And what we decided to do was to make it absolutely crystal clear by establishing what's called a general anti-avoidance rule within law, which is the standard by which we will test any attempts to take forward tax planning or tax avoidance. So we've set the highest standards. And in the weekend media, various commentators were saying that it was noticeable the difference in the approach that was being taken by the Scottish Government compared to the actions of the United Kingdom Government. I can give you an assurance that we will take the toughest possible line on tax avoidance as part of the way in which we take forward legislation as a Scottish Government. Now, on Michael's point about startups, a couple of years ago, I frankly was kind of confronted at an event not dissimilar to this by two guys who were taking forward an idea called Entrepreneurial Spark, and it was essentially a bit of an attempt to emulate Dragon's Den, of encouraging people to come forward with the business ideas, give them some support, and to try to launch these ideas. And at that time I was interested in their directness, but I was also interested in the fact that we had a pretty poor business startup rate in Scotland. Well, in the space of about 2 years or so, we've gone from 4th quartile of business startup rates in Scotland to 2nd quartile in the Global Entrepreneurship Index. Why? Because we've backed new start companies much more strongly than we've ever done before. We've now got a thing called the Scottish Edge Fund, which allows some of these new start companies to pitch for sums of money which can range from £10,000 to £50,000, crucial money to get businesses off the ground. And we've now got a much broader range of angel investors that are available to help these companies to grow and to develop. Where does the problem arise? The problem arises as these companies begin to grow, get stronger, and need more capital, and often the sources of that capital aren't available in Scotland. And that's the gap in the market that we're currently trying to address with our proposals to bring forward a Scottish Business Development Bank, which is part of the First Minister's programme for government. So I think we're making progress on the issue of business startups. I think we're in a much better place than we were 5 or 10 years ago within Scotland, but we've still got a way to go to improve that performance. But at the heart of that whole debate has to be the emphasis on innovation and developing new ideas and new products. And the First Minister and I saw some fantastic examples of that in Aberdeen today, and we see many other examples of that around the country.
Alex, do you want to take up housing?
Yeah. Can I first of all say that more housing and better housing for disabled people is a high priority of mine. If you look at Aberdeen City and Aberdeenshire at the present time, through various schemes, including Help to Buy and the Affordable Housing Programme, we are building something like just under 1,300 new homes in Aberdeen City and Aberdeenshire. And we're trying to ensure a fair proportion of those do have facilities, particularly wider entrances, wider doors, facilities for banners where required for disabled people. The problem arises because of the older housing stock, which makes up the vast bulk of the housing stock, was never ever built to facilitate the needs of disabled people. Now, local authorities have the power, and indeed they have the money, to help convert some of that private property for use by disabled people. When you're converting a private property or improving it, then you can apply for a grant of up to 100%. The local authority can very often decide whether or not to give you a grant. But where it's for a disabled person for disabled facilities, then you have an entitlement to a large grant towards the cost of converting a private property. So through that and through what we're doing through the new build programme, we're doing much more for disabled people than has ever been done before, but it's never enough, and I want to do more.
Okay, one of the questions that we've had on Twitter is, are there any plans that the Scottish Government has to incentivise councils to build council housing, not just social housing through the housing associations.
Well-
And also, as you know, and it's been talked about a lot, the acute problem that we have in Aberdeen. And people have said that abolishing the right to buy is very much a welcome step and in the right direction. But is there anything else that we can do to push councils to build more houses?
Well, we already provide incentives for councils to build new council houses. I mean, the year before we came into office, there was a total of 6 council houses built in the whole of Scotland, and all 6 of those houses were built in Shetland. And that was the rate of new house building in councils. Now, since we come in as a result of the incentives we have provided, cumulatively over the last 4 or 5 years, between 4,000 and 5,000 council houses have been built in different parts of Scotland, and every local authority is perfectly entitled and indeed encouraged by the Scottish Government, and we give them grant towards building new council houses. So we're doing everything we possibly can. I don't believe some local authorities are doing enough, and we want them to do more, because throughout Scotland now we need many, many more houses, including many more houses to rent. The Registrar General is forecasting that over the next 20 to 30 years, Scotland's population will rise from the current level of 5.3 million, which itself is a record, to nearly 6 million. On top of that, across Scotland, we have a total of 160,000 people on the council waiting list for a house. So there is no shortage of demand. And my message to Aberdeen Council, to Aberdeenshire Council, and to the other 30 local authorities in Scotland, use the power and the incentives that we are providing you to build as many council houses as you possibly can.
And we've talked about tax avoidance and tax evasion, but I must read you out this question from Stephen Mather at Ironbrew Kids. I just love that. He's asking, are you in the audience, Stephen? Yes, shall I read your question out, or do you want to read it? Yes, Joni, if you could come down here. This is about giving the government back money.
It is our great pleasure to get actually full cabinet here. My question is, though this is actually oil capital city, this is good, but my question, will Scottish children, Scottish students, will get an island or any other European countries which they are getting at this moment in Scotland? If not, then why? And second question, why the postgraduate student will not get the same facilities which are getting the undergraduate student? If we want to make the expertise, we need to actually train all kind of people so that they could actually make the benefit contribution throughout this country. Thank you.
Well, that wasn't the question I've got here, but the question I've got here is there a way of donating money, prescription money, eye test money, etc., to leave money in a will to the NHS? So rather than taking money from the government, this is giving it back. So can I give that to someone, to First Minister?
Why don't we take another round of
Another
three,
couple?
okay?
Yes, okay. Okay, if we come down to the front here, Joni, or down here, yes.
Good evening to you, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, and to your ministerial colleagues. My name is Peter Dow, and I thank you for this opportunity to ask you a question. Please may I have my computer equipment returned to me from the police, who seized it when they raided my home in July 2014. They've taken my scientific research data, which is irreplaceable. The police say they won't return my property unless and until they're instructed to do so by the Procurator Fiscal Service. My lawyer has written to them, I've written to them, but the Procurator Fiscal Service have not replied to state any outstanding reason for still holding on to my computer equipment, and after 6 months, I'm still waiting. Isn't it time for the Scottish Government law officers to look into this and then to order the return of my computer equipment? Also, I noticed that our new First Minister did not appoint new law officers or a new Chief Constable of Police Scotland. And shouldn't any First Minister be allowed to pick a new team of colleagues and not be stuck with those from the previous administration.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the person next to you? We have one. Can we have the next question? Yeah, thank you.
First Minister and Cabinet, thank you very much for coming to Aberdeen and listening to the lovely people. Unlike Aberdeen City Council, who aren't listening to us about the Marshall Square development, thank you. As you can hear, the people, we don't want it. We could revitalise Union Street. We could use the money that we have to help Aberdeen in so many other ways. However, the council have blinkers on. They're not listening to us. They just don't listen. They're just not listening to us. How can you help us, please? Thank you.
Okay, can we ask the First Minister to reply?
The question that was submitted on Twitter about people leaving money in their will to the NHS, people do that. There is lots of legacy income in the health service. Far be it from me to tell anybody what to write in their wills, but the NHS is always a worthy cause, in my humble opinion. Peter, your questions. Firstly, your question that was directed to me about the law officers. When I became First Minister, I had the opportunity, if I had so chosen, when I appointed my cabinet, to change the law officers. I decided to keep the law officers as they were, but it was my decision. I wasn't stuck with them. I opted to keep the 2 law officers in their posts. I think the rest of your question, Peter, as I said up there, you know, if there are questions of a personal nature, I don't think it's appropriate to air those questions in a public audience. It may be that you can have a word with Michael Matheson, who is the Justice Secretary, afterwards. I would say, though, and I'm sure you appreciate this point, that for very good and sound and solid reasons, the police and in their prosecution capacity, the law officers are independent of government, and politicians rightly cannot instruct the police or the law officers in the decisions they make around prosecution decisions. But with that caveat, Michael would be happy to have a word with you afterwards this evening. Now, I'm going to ask colleagues to... I think your question was, if I understood it correctly, was about facilities for postgraduate students.
My question is, you know, the Scottish children,
they
are not getting the same facilities in England, Wales and...
undergraduate students. Are you talking about tuition fees?
Which they are getting here. And then my question, will the new power what the Scottish government will get the same facilities in England, Wales and other...
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure, before I ask one of my colleagues, I'm just trying to make sure I understand the question you're asking so we don't answer the wrong question. Are you talking about university students?
Yeah.
Yes. So university students who go from Scotland to England... And was okay. Well, I'm going to ask Angela to talk a bit about the arrangements we have in place. I'm guessing, although I'm maybe guessing wrongly, that you're talking about the tuition fee payment of tuition fee issue. Yeah. Okay. In that case, I'm going to ask Angela to. Right. Well, can I, in the interest of time here, if we don't answer the question quite as you want us to, catch Angela over a cup of tea and a biscuit and pin her down later on. Okay. Metaphorically speaking. And then I'm going to ask Alec Neil. Look, I'm going to ask Alec Neil to answer the question from a planning perspective, because Alec is the planning minister on the Marshall Square development. You will appreciate that this is a local council decision, and the gentleman at the front who was suggesting how you might want to deal with it, far be it from me to say anything, but I think he might have had a point. Public authorities have got an absolute duty to listen to people. Now, there will always be occasions where decisions are taken that are not what people want. No, I'm not arguing with you. I am making my view clear that the obligation to listen meaningfully to people is not one that should be dismissed lightly or taken lightly by any public authority. And I think I detected the strength of feeling in this room about the particular development we're talking about. But Angela, do you want to say a word about the position of Scottish students going to England and what that means with tuition fees? And then Alec, if you can maybe address the Marshall Square from a planning perspective.
Yes, of course, and I'm happy to have a word with the gentleman afterwards just to make sure that I've understood the detail of his question absolutely correctly. Of course, it's been a hallmark of this government that education should be based on the ability to learn and not the ability to pay. I myself have benefited from free higher education. I certainly know it's a cause that's dear to the First Minister's heart, and right across government, we have government ministers who were the first in their family to go to university and therefore benefit from free tuition. And the last thing that we want to do is to take that ladder of opportunity to the generations that come behind us. And that's a very important point of principle. And I do appreciate that there is a complexity to some of the cross-border arrangements. Of course, the situation would be far simpler if the UK government hadn't introduced tuition fees. And of course, tuition fees have rocketed south of the border as well, and that's had various unintended consequences. But in terms of supporting students that are resident in Scotland, the Scottish Government has been very clear that is a funded commitment, and students, Scottish resident students, are supported financially. There are issues when students go across the border to study, and I'm happy to pick up some of the issues if there's bits and pieces around specific courses. We are looking at postgraduate provision, because I think you mentioned also in your question about postgraduates. As a government, while we have prioritised undergraduates, which is primarily, although not exclusively, young people leaving school to go to university for the first time to study for their degree. We are aware that we also want to encourage continuous study, particularly top postgraduate courses, as well as the research postgraduate courses, because that's also highly relevant to particular aspects of our economy as well. And where there have been some declines in some of that top provision, we are looking very closely at that, and there's Professor Brian McGregor from the University of Aberdeen that is leading a review on postgraduate provision as well. But I'm happy to pick up any of the finer detail afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Alec.
Marshall Square, now I understand totally the strong feeling there is in Aberdeen about this issue, but I actually think this has become more of an issue of local democracy than an issue of planning. And it is a local planning decision. It's a decision made by the council. It doesn't meet the criteria to allow us to call it in nationally. It has to be a local decision. But my suggestion to you is this. In a few weeks' time, we have a general election. And every political party will be knocking on your door and every other door in this city looking for your vote. So you ask them when they come to the door, or if they dare hold public meetings, go to the public meetings and ask them what they're going to do as local politicians about this particular issue, and allow their answer to that decision to inform how you're going to vote. Next year, you've got the Scottish Parliament elections, and the year after that, you've got the council elections. So if you send a loud and clear message to the politicians that how you decide to vote will be, at least to some extent, dependent on how democratic they are when it comes to this decision, I'll bet you can change some minds in the next few weeks.
Okay, are there any hands up in the middle of that section over there? Yes, just about the middle of the section, a lady with a black jumper on.
Hi, I just wanted to raise the issue of TTIP and the concerns we've got that big business will be profiting at the expense of universal health care, food safety, a number of other things, and the worry that I have that it's an erosion in democracy and empowerment of big businesses. Maybe you could answer that question.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any more towards the back of that section? Yes, one at the back there.
Hi, my name is Arundhati Dasgupta. I'm an MBA student from Robert Gordon University, Oil and Gas So my question pertains to oil and gas. You're having around 80,000 cubic meters of shale gas in Scotland, but there's a lack of infrastructure. How do you plan to take that into court or invest in getting shale gas out? And part two, with the EU 2020 regulation, what are your viewpoints with respect to the renewables? Thank you.
And the gentleman there, yes, thank you.
Hi, Kieran. My question relates to, I'm quite a major part of a local sports team, and the funding available to us is very good, the likes of the Sports Match Scheme, Awards for All through the Lottery and so on. But a major problem that our team and pretty much every other team in the area are suffering from is the cost of sporting facilities. It's all very well having a new facility like the Sports Village when no one can afford to use it, especially when it's generally 18 plus. You'll get child discounts, but it's very, very expensive to get adult sports teams into these facilities on a weekly basis. So my question is, have you got any plans to help local clubs with the costs of meeting these obligations?
Okay, thanks very much. In a second, I'll ask Shona, who's responsible for sport, to answer that question about access to local sports facilities. Fergus, I'll come to you on shale gas and renewables. Let me just firstly, though, address the TTIP point. I agree with you wholeheartedly. For those who might not know what TTIP is, it's the proposed transatlantic trade and investment partnership between European Union and the United States of America. It's still in the process of being negotiated. One of the problems, people say to me, are you for or against TTIP? It's impossible to say because we don't yet know what's going to be in TTIP. It's been negotiated under a bit of a cloak of secrecy, which in itself is one of the problems. But there's two things that concern me greatly, or at least two things that concern me greatly. One is the fear that what TTIP will do is open up our public services, and in particular our National Health Service, to the threat of privatisation. Now, how can I put this as bluntly as I can? We are opposed to the privatisation of our health service with absolutely everything we've got. We would not support any agreement that opened our health service to that kind of threat. And John Swinney leads on this issue for us and was before a parliamentary committee 2 weeks ago. And we've called for an explicit and express exclusion from TTIP for our NHS and indeed for public services generally. Second issue, which I won't go into in too much detail, is what's called investor-state dispute resolution, which in short, and I'm probably oversimplifying here, is a situation where a company could have the right to sue a national government if they thought the policy of that government was hindering their commercial interests. Alec Neil rightly talked about democratic issues earlier. I think that runs full square into most people's notion of democracy, being that elected governments, not private companies, decide the public policy of the country. So that's another issue that we're expressing some concern about. Trade partnerships in and of themselves are not bad things. They can be good for our economy. This one may well open up export opportunities for our food and drink industry, perhaps our energy sector. So it's not in and of itself a bad thing, but these particular concerns have to be addressed if we're going to support it, and we're very, very vigilant about these issues at the moment. So I think you're right to raise that. With that, Fergus, do you want to take on Arindi's points about shale gas and about renewables?
Thank you, First Minister. Well, certainly to take renewables first, we do have a policy of being supportive towards renewables. We led the world in hydroelectric power, and we can do more there. We have supported onshore wind as well as biomass, and though it's not always apparent, solar energy is effective in Scotland, even on cloudy days, so I'm told by the engineers. There needs to be a balance though, so we also need baseload and backup. We support the life extension of nuclear power stations as long as they can safely and efficiently be operated. And we need to have a balance of gas and coal thermal generation. And today you may have heard that there is a particular threat to the premature closure of Lungannet Power Station, a threat which we think should be averted by a deal between the National Grid and Scottish Power. And the First Minister has written today to the Prime Minister urging him to order that National Grid and the regulators, frankly, get a grip and sort this out so that we can continue to have a balance, because if I'm allowed to quote Winston Churchill, an SNP audience, First Minister.
Can we take a vote on it? Carry on.
Winston Churchill said that when it comes to electricity supply, the solution is variety and variety alone, which puts it well. With regard to shale, we recently made a statement in the Scottish Parliament after very long deliberation and listening to, if you like, both sides of the argument, both those who feel very strongly and passionately that the process of hydraulic fracturing is one which is uncertain and which may carry with it certain risks to the environment and pollution, public health, as well as a considerable amount of injection of water and disposal of waste. And those who hold these views very strongly may argue that the vast plains of North Dakota, where there is few human beings and thousands of flat areas which are suitable for the sort of activity, is not at all like Scotland, and particularly the areas where the shale gas deposits are believed to be, although the British Geological Survey is uncertain about that. Putting it bluntly, how would you feel about hundreds of extra lorry loads down any roads near you? That's a perfectly legitimate concern, and therefore we decided two things. One, that we are aware that there is a vast amount of evidence about the engineering process throughout the world, but there is not a vast amount of evidence about how that may apply to Scotland. And therefore we need to get expert evidence on a range of issues that I've mentioned. And secondly, because we are to assume power and responsibility over unconventional activity, that's shale gas and coal bed methane, for example, onshore, but not offshore, because those powers will vest in Holyrood, we expect from 2016, we think we should have a debate in Scotland. We think the people should ultimately decide what the policy should be. There has not been a debate, and there should be a debate, and therefore I will be announcing in the next few months a process of consultation. So, to conclude, First Minister, our process is cautious and careful and evidence-based, and we think there needs to be a national discussion about this before we fire ahead willy-nilly with a gung-ho attitude, which seems to be that which characterises the approach of our colleagues down south. And that is why, in the last couple of weeks, I announced that until such time as that evidence is available and the consultation has taken place and we've weighed the results of that up, there is in place now a moratorium in Scotland. There will be no planning permission granted for hydraulic fracturing onshore for any activities meantime in Scotland.
On the question about the Aberdeen Sports Village, first of all, a big thank you to those of you that are involved with sports clubs, because without you as volunteers, we wouldn't have all of the thousands of clubs that we have throughout Scotland, providing great opportunities for young people to take part in sport. So thank you for that. On the issue of affordability of Aberdeen Sports Village facilities or any other, I mean, these are facilities that are run by the local council or a leisure trust, as many councils have gone down that route. And what we do expect, if they receive Sport Scotland funding, as the Aberdeen Sports Village did, is for affordability to be part of that. So I will ask Sport Scotland to discuss that further with Aberdeen City Council or the Leisure Trust to make sure that that is looked at. Sport Scotland also provide direct funding to clubs, and it's worth discussing with them whether your club could get access to some of that Sports Direct funding that they provide to clubs. And just finally, we've also funded what are known as community sports hubs, and this is about opening schools after hours and other facilities that should be open in the evening and at weekends. And one of the criteria for receiving funding from Sports Scotland for those community sports hubs is that they must be affordable and accessible to the local community. So I'll certainly make sure that Sports Scotland pick up that discussion with Aberdeen Council. But thanks again for the efforts that you do through running the club.
We had a very similar question sent in from Derek Robertson, although I don't know if that was Derek Robertson that asked the question, but it reminds me, can you say your name before you ask your question? Can we move over to the back of this section of the hall? If we've got time, I'll go round again, but from the back of this section, please. Yes, the gentleman in the white shirt at the back, please.
Hi, it's Angus MacDonald speaking here. I've got a couple of questions for the Justice Minister regarding the recent proclamation from Jim Murphy about reintroducing alcohol at football grounds. I think that would really be a retrospective step, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's old enough here to remember the bad old days with alcohol was actually awash at football grounds and all sorts of problems in the 80s. My second question also is about knife crime. I know that the figures, I don't actually have them at my fingertips here, but the knife crime figures have dropped substantially over the years since certainly the SNP government came into power. But I did see something in the paper recently about some sort of problem with stop and search with Police Scotland. So could you perhaps explain exactly what the situation is regarding the stop and search, please?
Okay, any further questions from this end? Yes, sir. There's two down this side here. Gentleman there and then the lady in front.
Hi Nicola, good evening. Unfortunately, I've been working in the oil and gas sector offshore for the last 20 years and I'm just in the process of redundancy. We all know due to the fact with the oil price, but also the taxation rate in the UK from Mr. Cameron and his Diddy men, you know. What I would like to see him doing, and also yourself, because I know you've been speaking to him, is reduce the taxes, create incentives for exploration, and get the companies to come back into the Scottish waters to start drilling. If not, at present time, these companies are starting to pull out the big players. There's plenty of oil in Scotland, not only on the east coast or north, but on the west coast. And I believe if this was mentioned before the referendum on the west coast, we'd be an independent country now. And most importantly, when's the next vote for independence?
Hello, my name's Gladys Hammond. I want to speak about disability. I've been fighting the government for over a year now to do with ethos. Now, I would like to know what Nicola can do to stop this. Ethos is now parking in this year and another one coming in. And I would like to see this stop. To the disabled people have to go through things is disgusting.
Yep.
And some of these people are not even doctors. And I would really like, I've been fighting for this disabled people. I'm disabled myself, I'm too old now. But I would like the government to try and stop this other company coming in to do the same thing. And if I had seen Al Cabra in the day, I'll tell you, I'd be jailed for him. But I do hope that everyone votes SNP to the government so they can get more.
Okay, thank you very much, Gladys. First Minister.
I'm here in a government capacity, so I can't possibly comment on that directly, but you talk a lot of sense, that's all I can say. Right, Michael, do you want to pick up Angus's points about alcohol at football and knife crime stop and search?
Yeah, I think, Angus, you've raised two very important points, and there obviously has been a debate around the idea of reintroducing alcohol for sale in our football grounds. And I think, Angus, from your own life experience, you've saw firsthand the consequences when things can go wrong, where people have simply drunk too much alcohol and get involved in violent activity that can take place within our football grounds. What I would say is, the important thing here is to provide a safe, family-friendly environment for young people and those with families to be able to go along and enjoy a football match. I personally think that when I take my kids along to see the football, which I do on a regular basis, I can go 90 minutes without any alcohol, and I think most reasonable people can as well. The other important part about this is that in having any discussion or any consideration of this issue about reintroducing alcohol into football grounds, this is far too important an issue for it just to be turned into a political game by a given individual for their own political ends. If we're going to make a decision about something like this, it has to be done in a very wide-ranging, consultative way, engaging not just with football fans, but with the wider community as well, including those who may live close to football grounds, who could be affected by it, and all of the other organisations such as those who deal with women who experience domestic violence and all the other difficulties that can come from this issue as well. So as we have said as a government, it will take us some persuading if we were to change what has been an area that has improved the environment for young people and for families to go along to enjoy their football, and also to help to change Scotland, what has been a very difficult relationship with alcohol for over many decades. And what we shouldn't do is start to unpick that because of the views of one or two individuals in the run-up to a general election campaign. On the second point around knife crime, you're correct to highlight that there has been a very significant reduction in knife crime. If I recall off the top of my head, almost a 60% reduction in knife crime in Scotland. And a big part of that has been because of the proactive work that's been taken forward by Police Scotland in tackling this particular issue, along with another range of third sector organisations. And part of the way in which they've gone about achieving that is the stop and search policy which they've taken forward for older children. The issue you've picked up on fairly recently has been the stop and search for consensual searches. That's where there's no statutory reason for them to do so, but where they have asked if they can search someone for those who were under 12. And Police Scotland have made it very clear that they will be stopping that practice. What we need to do is to make sure that the approach that Police Scotland take to stop and search is one which we as a community, as a country, have confidence in and that we are comfortable with, and that it is effective in helping to disrupt and to deal with criminal activity as well. And Police Scotland are now having a debate and a discussion with stakeholders on what's the best approach going forward. But it's important we also recognise that stop and search has played a very important part in making sure we've had that reduction in knife crime in Scotland and in other forms of criminal activity. So we have to take a balanced approach in going forward in this issue.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Alec, do you want to briefly answer Gladys's question about the treatment of people with disabilities and ATOS and the assessment process?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I say that the benefit changes that have taken place over the last 4 years have been particularly damaging to disabled people. If you take the bedroom tax, 80% of the households affected by the bedroom tax have a disabled person in them. And when we get the power, we will abolish the bedroom tax the minute we get the power to do so. But we would like... we would like not just have the powers that they're promising, but we'd want the powers over all aspects of welfare, because quite frankly the benefit system has been left in a shambolic state after what's happened in recent years. And what we want to do is to create a humane system. And the assessment you referred to that's currently undertaken by ATOS is a very good example of that, where we want properly qualified people to assess people when they need to be assessed. I have to say, some of the folk being assessed, they've got no chance of ever working again because of their condition, and why we waste time and money assessing people in that situation is crazy, in my view. We want a humane system. And you know, one of the worst things I think in the whole benefit system is that people are left talking to computers instead of talking to another human being at the other end of the desk so that they can actually explain the problem and have their help in addressing the problem. So we want to humanise the welfare system. We want to stop the attacks on disabled people in particular, and we want a fairer system. I'm the first to say that anybody who deliberately commits fraud against the benefit system should be properly punished. But that's a very small percentage. And let me finish with this statistic. The estimated level of fraud across the whole of the UK on the social security system is worth £1.2 billion a year. The tax dodging and evasion that the First Minister referred to previously is estimated to cost the taxpayer over £70 billion a year. And yet I'm told that the number of people in the tax office chasing the fraudsters is only 5% of the numbers in the Social Security fraud office chasing the people who commit Social Security fraud. If we chase the tax dodgers, then we can treat all our people, including our disabled people, with much more dignity than is happening at the present time.
And lastly,
Okay, if we can
lastly,
have
sorry, we've got one more question, sorry,
sorry.
on oil and gas, very briefly. In terms of your own redundancy situation, if you want to, leave us your details before you go tonight so that we can make sure the government agencies that provide advice and support, if you're in contact already, that's great. Your points on tax, I agree with 100%, and these are the kind of tax changes that we're calling on the UK government to make. And your final question, when will the next vote on Scottish independence be? That's not up to me, that's up to the people of this country. But let me say this, if we end up after this general election with another government we haven't voted for, imposing more austerity cuts on our most vulnerable, maybe taking us out of Europe against our will, then it might be a lot sooner than any of us thought.
Okay, some questions from this section in the middle here. The lady in the red. Yes, you. Can we have a mic down here, please? Just the lady in the middle here. Thank you.
Hello, Lorna Bates from Stonehaven. I would like the Scottish Government to consider a proposal. The National Health Service is under a lot of pressure. It's finding it very difficult financially to meet the needs of all the ill people that we have in the country. I would suggest at the moment we are tackling the symptoms by dishing out tablets to treat all these illnesses, whereas we should be tackling the causes. Now, to tackle the causes, again, most illnesses are caused by stress. My proposal is that each doctor's surgery should have an alternative therapy centre that can deal with, people if just want to discuss their illness, perhaps Reiki, acupuncture, reflexology, just to name a few. And I think this wouldn't cost the country any more money, because instead of giving tablets, which are sometimes not necessary, we could deal with the problems by speaking to people. And this would make the health service more efficient and would cost no more money, but would be more effective.
Okay, thank you. And the young gentleman that you're standing next to with the mic there, yes?
Thank you very much, and good evening, First Minister and members of the Cabinet. I'm Josh McCree, and I live in Inverurie near Aberdeen. Given the level of interest from young people during the referendum campaign, I'd like to ask the Scottish Government what plans they have to nurture this interest in politics in the future.
And the gentleman in the pink just come forward a bit more. Yeah, this gentleman here with his hand up, yeah, pink shirt.
Good evening, my name's Jim McPherson. I noticed in your startup video that you want to do address inequality. Well, for quite some time now, the councillors in Aberdeen and the NHS have been telling us that the Scottish Government is underfunding them. When are you going to address that?
Okay. Shona, can you take the question about dealing with the causes rather than the symptoms of ill health? Josh, I think we may just have seen a future First Minister in the audience there. I'm going to ask Fiona to answer your question about how we keep young people engaged in politics. And then, John, do you want to take on the issues about alleged, and I stress the word alleged, underfunding of the NHS and local government in Aberdeen? Shona.
Well, I think Laura makes some good points there. The health budget next year for 2015-16 is going to reach £12 billion for the first time. So that's a lot of money by anybody's standards. But of course, there's more and more demands on that budget, which I guess addresses Jim's point as well. So with ever-increasing ageing population, which is a good thing because we want people to live longer, but we want them to be as healthy as possible when they are living longer. So we absolutely need to make sure that we're not just treating people, and while medication and prescriptions are an important part, and of course free prescriptions was something this government is very proud of, because we don't believe in a tax on ill health. However, you're right, the more we can do to keep people fit and healthy, part of that is about some of the public health campaigns that we have, some of the investments we're making there. But there is something about trying to make sure that when GPs have someone in front of them, that there's a range of options for them. And that's not just about writing a prescription, although it might be appropriate in that patient's case. One of the pilots that I was interested in was a counselling service that was located within GP surgeries, so that when someone was suffering from depression or stress, that actually talking to someone about their problems was the most valuable thing for that person, and actually it reduced the number of people coming back to see the GP quite dramatically. So we have some additional investment to make in primary care, and I'm keen to look at ways like that to try and avoid people coming back and back to the GPs for the same thing. And if we can use some of the things, whether it's talking therapies or other things that people actually need, then that's something I'm very keen to look at. So yes, we have a lot of money for the health service, but increasing demands, and we need to make sure we spend that money as wisely as possible.
Okay, thanks. Fiona, will you take Fiona Josh's point?
Josh, that was an extremely well presented question and a really important issue. I think during the period of the referendum, we saw the country energised, but we also saw something for the first time, that people could actively see the engagement of young people in politics and political ideas. And the First Minister spoke about Scotland being able to envisage a new future and thinking about the values it wanted to see in its country. And what better place and time to do that than when you're 16, 17. One of the proudest moments I had in my life was taking my 17-year-old son to vote on the day of the referendum. And he had his school uniform on, and his friends were there as well, either going to school or on the way back. It meant that they were registered. It meant that they'd had the experience of voting before they'd left school, which means if they go to university or leave to go to work, they'll have that habit and shape it again. But the important thing is that engagement. Remember at the Hydro, there was a big debate. My son went to that as well. 12,000 young people were all there, engaged, listening to the debate taking place and shaping and asking questions. And if we want a future where people care or engage, come to meetings like this, then we have to make sure young people are supported. And one of the ways we can do that is through the education system. Curriculum for Excellence, being a responsible citizen, means there's going to be responsibilities for schools taking this forward. But one of the important achievements that John Swinney and the team that were taking forward the Smith Commission on behalf of this government achieved was the transfer of powers for voting for 16 and 17-year-olds for the Scottish Parliament elections. So though my son and people his age won't be able to vote in the elections coming up in Westminster, under our watch, under the SNP government, they will be able to vote at 16 and 17 come the Scottish Parliament elections. That's the future of democracy in this country. We're a beacon for it across the world. And only last week I had the Irish Minister for Foreign Affairs here, very interested in how we've engaged young people in this country. People are watching across the world, and we can lead the way on this.
What age are you, Josh? You're 12. Okay, we might not be able to...
We're safe for a while.
...to lower the voting age that low, but you'll go far. John, do you want to take the points about funding of health and local government in Aberdeen?
I will do, First Minister. The first thing I'd say, Jim, is that obviously any discussion around the public finances for our local authorities or our health boards has to be set within the context of the general public finance position in Scotland. And since 2010, public spending in Scotland has been reduced by 10% when you take inflation into account. So there's been a very substantial reduction in public expenditure that we've had to manage, decisions taken by the UK government that we've had to manage. Now within that, what we've tried to do is to take steps to protect local authority and health funding as much as we possibly can do. And particularly on health expenditure, the health service has been guaranteed an increase of inflation for health boards within Scotland. So if I look, for example, at the figures in NHS Grampian, NHS Grampian's budget in the next financial year, 2015-16, will increase its resource budget by 6.7%. 6.7%.
If you let them answer the question, I think you'll get the answer.
Well, I'll just come on to that specific point, but the first point I want to make is just to put in context, the health board budget in Grampian will go up by 6.7%. Now, there is no other health board in the country that will have a budget that will go up by 6.7%. Not a single other health board. Now, what that will mean, and the reason why it's so large, is because the Health Secretary has taken a set of decisions to improve the level of funding that has been applied to NHS Grampian. That's been staged over a number of years, and what it will mean in 2015-16 is that NHS Grampian's budget is within 1% of parity with the remainder of health boards around the country. Now, it can't be done overnight because our budget has been cut by 10%, but big progress has been made, and a 6.7% increase, frankly, would be the envy of the country of any other health board. Now, when it comes to the local authority, one of the issues that my dear and late colleague Brian Adam, who was the MSP for North Aberdeen for many years, persistently pressed about was the relative financial support to Aberdeen City Council. And for years, and I listened to Brian raise this issue in opposition for 8 years, and he made no progress with it when we were in opposition. But when we came to government, he made the argument that Aberdeen's funding was being eroded relative to the rest of the country. So I introduced an additional provision, additional money specifically for local authorities whose budget, their per capita expenditure, fell below 85% of the Scottish average. Now, the local authority funding formula is driven by need, and a whole host of indicators go into it, and when an authority falls below 85%, I intervene to protect that authority. That has resulted, between 2012 and 2015, in Aberdeen City Council getting £7 million more in spending than it would have got if I'd done nothing about it. And in 2015-16, Aberdeen City Council will get £11.3 million more than if I'd done nothing about it. So, whilst I appreciate there are long-standing concerns and issues about public funding in the northeast of Scotland, I think those indications of £11.3 million next year extra for Aberdeen City Council and an increase in the health board budget of 6.7% demonstrates this government's delivering for Aberdeen and the northeast of Scotland.
In terms of, so basically, what you're told about the disparity between Aberdeen and the rest of the country is long-standing, but we, unlike our predecessor governments, are tackling that and addressing that. As John said, it can't be done overnight without immediately penalising other parts of the country, but through the action John has described on local government funding and the action Shona has taken on health funding, that disparity between Aberdeen and the rest of the country is being narrowed to the point of being eliminated. And that's what we're doing. The governments of the parties that are complaining about all of this to you have never done themselves, and I think we deserve some credit for doing that. Well, I appreciate that. Why? Yeah. Yeah. That's what we want. That's what we're working towards. Yes. If, in the interest of trying to get another round of questions in, if you want to speak to John or myself afterwards, just a bit more of the detail. But the short answer is yes, that's what we're working towards, but it takes time to get there. Okay?
Yes, we've had an hour of questions actually, and I'm going to take one more round. I'm conscious that Rosanna Cunningham hasn't had a question, so we've got one here on Twitter, Rosanna. Why, as a small business owner of a children's nursery, do I have to pay for apprentices level 2 in childcare and development when they can go to college and get it for free with no guarantee of a job afterwards? We haven't had any rural affairs and environment questions, Richard, but I know you've been in Ballater today, and I know how you go around all the marks and things, so you're well available. Make yourself readily available to the rural community. So, some questions from this point here, and if you haven't had your question answered, remember you've got the sheets on your chair, and you can have some questions over a cup of tea. So, from this point here, yes, you in the front, sir.
Hi, Sean Strachan. I'm from Stonehaven also. A lot of issues come from like health, depression, and all this stuff. We've talked about it slightly, and getting to the point of the issue with the pills as well, talking about drugs just getting handed out to solve the problem. The problem starts in school. When you look at what happens at PE, nothing. They're running about aimlessly for an hour or whatnot. What we need to do is educate people, kids, how to train themselves, keep themselves healthy and all that. Because, as I say, I've got stepkids in there in secondary school. They're not learning anything. They're playing badminton, and then they're playing football for a couple of months, then they're doing this. There's loads of kids who are playing football, not getting past the ball, not getting exercise. But if you're doing specific things where we're here to train, we're here to learn, this is what this muscle does, this is how we do this. I'm a fitness instructor. The amount of money I'm making off of clueless people who don't know how to do a basic squat is ridiculous. We're a developed country. We're a developed country. Kids should be getting taught how to look after themselves after school. This is how we eat.
Okay, I think we've got the question. And the lady in the beige jumper here in the middle of the second row here, please. In the middle of the second row here. Just the lady with her hand up here? Yes, thank you.
I think my question follows on from actually what you've been saying. I had a background in health and social care, and I worked for many years with children with particular needs of all varieties. However, I question where we are with actually taking away parents' responsibilities, looking at free school meals for children, looking at raising free childcare. Should perhaps, parents not be taking responsibility or being helped to take responsibility rather than us all becoming this kind of nanny state? I mean, I look at some children go to breakfast clubs, spend the whole day in school, then they go to after-school clubs. Who's bringing up these children? And I think that has a huge effect on where we are going to be in generations to come.
Okay, you've got 3 questions there.
Okay.
First Minister.
Right, Rosanna will answer the one from Twitter, and then I think, Angela, do you want to pick up the other 2 about school PE, fitness education, and the point about free school meals, childcare? Rosanna.
Yes, the question that's been asked about paying for apprentices as opposed to those who can go to college and do a course full-time for free. This is really one that plays that my portfolio remit, as you may have forgotten by now, is Fair Work, Skills and Training. So this is really part and parcel of the skills and training side of what I do. And one of the most important things that we're trying to achieve in Scotland is to ensure that our young people get the very best possible chances that they can get, and a variety of different options are kept open for them so that they are able to make choices at an early stage about how they wish to see their life and their work develop. Now, there are lots of different ways one can do that. We set up a commission, the Sir Ian Wood Commission that was set up some time ago, reported last year. The government has adopted every single one of its recommendations. But key to that very detailed work that was done was the realization that we shouldn't simply be streaming some young people off into academic futures, and the rest are somehow left somewhere else without really much hope. And The most important work that we are doing is to ensure that for all young people, the wide range of options which will include apprenticeships and various kinds of skills and training are available. But that does mean letting young people choose the way forward for them. And there are courses that are available at college that people can do full-time, and it may very well be that local colleges here are offering nursery provision training that people are able to sign up to full-time. But I still think it's important that employers are involved in that process as well. Because if we don't involve employers, then we're not actually developing the skills that we need for the future. Many of you here will be reading in your newspapers about a shortage of skills in the construction industry and a shortage of skills even in oil and gas. And part of that's because we've lost that culture of training young people in our workplaces, and they may be getting that training in the workplaces and released to college as well. So I want to say to all employers, including young employers, and that does include the nursery provision, that it is extremely important that you consider whether or not you can make a place for a young apprentice in your workplace. I say half jokingly to every woman I meet, you would hardly ever expect to go to a hairdresser and not meet at the hairdresser 1 or 2 juniors who are training to go on into that particular sector. And we'd like to see that spread out right throughout all of the sectors of industry if we could. Take a while to get there, but it is important that we do get there. So part of this is about engaging employers in this conversation. And if the nursery employer is listening to this, I would encourage him or her to go into a dialogue locally with either the college or indeed the new regional Invest in Young People group that we have setting up this week. Because that's where this conversation has to be had about the right choices for young people at the right age, and not have young people simply thinking there's only one way to do things when there's actually more than one way.
Okay, thanks, Rosanna. And thank you. I think the gentleman raises a really good point. I mean, physical education is a very important part of the curriculum and the experience that our children get at school. It is important that as part of PE that children have experienced a variety of sports. I don't mean to offend the football fans out there, but there is more to sport than football, and it's important that children's experience and that their eyes are opened to the variety of sport out there. And this government, we inherited a target of the previous government, which was that every child should have 2 hours of PE. Now that was a target that the previous government were woefully failing on. It is a target that the vast majority of children in schools are actually on target with. And you know, that's something that Shona has overseen in her health portfolio as well, in terms of a target that we now actually meet. But the really important point is that health and well-being is an important part of our curriculum. And the First Minister last week made a massive announcement of additional investment into rising up attainment. And that will focus on numeracy, literacy, but also health and well-being. So that's the importance that we place on this. And, you know, enabling children to look after their own health and well-being is absolutely crucial to raising attainment, to raising educational attainment in this country. And the other, my final point, First Minister, is that poverty doesn't stop at the school gate. That's why we're investing in free school meals, because children won't learn if they're hungry. We know that most people who are living below the threshold, that are struggling to make ends meet, are actually people that are in work. So they're out there working hard for their poverty. So I don't make any apologies for this government trying to help people with making ends meet. And it is important that we are ensuring that children are fed and are receiving the appropriate nutrition that's going to enable them to learn, particularly in those vital years. And it isn't free childcare. We're talking about early learning and childcare. We know that if you compare 15-year-olds, you can see a vast difference in the educational attainment of 15-year-olds who've benefited from early learning and childcare to those 15-year-olds that are not. And childcare isn't just a policy for women and families and their children. It is a crucial part of our economy. And one of the things that the referendum campaign did very successfully is it located our commitment to that massive expansion of early learning and childcare as good for children, good for families, but absolutely crucial for our economy.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I should have said that Fergus Ewing didn't walk out, but he had to go and do a TV interview. Can I thank you all for raising such interesting and diverse questions? I'm sure we could have gone on for another hour, if not two, but we've covered local issues, national issues, and even international issues with TTIP, and I hope you found this evening's event both informative but also enjoyable. If you want to meet the Cabinet members, if you'd like to make your way to the cafe in the Mary Garden Room, we'll join you in a few minutes. But can I, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the First Minister and the Cabinet, thank you very much for coming this evening and asking your questions. I hope you have enjoyed it, and can we wish you all a safe journey home. Thank you very much.